field for years. Yesterday at our roundtable at the University of Cincinnati, Patrick Snaden put it very well when he pointed out to his students that Donovan is responsible for bringing an entirely new approach, an extremely important dimension to the preservation movement. Our speaker modestly describes himself as a numbers geek, but I would add one thing to that, one whose ideas, theories, and hard work have transformed the field of preservation, and in the process, transformed cities and communities throughout the world. It's truly a great honor to present today Donovan Rypkema. I'm sorry it was long.
No. Thank you, Paul. That was a very gracious and humbling introduction. Mostly not true, but doesn't mean I don't greatly appreciate it. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here, and I'm most pleased to be joining the Cincinnati Preservation Association in celebrating your 50th year. There's no question that the excellent quality and quantity of the historic built environment still standing in Cincinnati is a direct result of the advocacy, education, and influence that CPA has had over the years. Nor should it be a surprise to any of you that CPA is known nationally as one of the great local historic preservation organizations. The theme of this year's Fall Forum, Preservation Gets Serious, is also both timely and important, and let me tell you why. 3 weeks ago, Governor Jerry Brown signed a bill making California the first state in the nation to essentially ban all plastic bags. And this was obviously an environmental initiative, something that Brown is well known for. Here's what the New York Times wrote about him. In Brown's long record of public service, one area stands out where he has arguably put in the most time and had the most effect, the environment. And here's what the bill's sponsor said. State Senator Alex Padilla said, "I applaud Governor Brown for signing SB 270 into law. He continues to lead our state forward with a commitment to sustainability. A throwaway society is not sustainable." Well, I certainly agree with Senator Padilla on that. But that same week, Governor Brown vetoed a bill that would have created a state historic rehabilitation tax credit in California like you have here in Ohio. And this bill, by the way, passed the state assembly by 75-0 and the state senate by 30-0. And the reason that was given for the veto was that the bill should be weighed against other important priorities. Well, that makes sense. So let's weigh it against plastic bags. Well, get rid of all of the plastic bags used in California in a year, and it reduces the impact on landfills by 123,000 tons. Rehabilitate instead of raise 49 50,000 square foot warehouses and reduce the impact on the landfill by 122,500 tons. Plastic bags make up 3% of the waste in California. Construction debris and demolition make up 29%. Entirely end the use of plastic bags in California and reduce CO2 emissions by 468 tons per year. Rehabilitate rather than raise 5 new 50,000 square foot warehouses, and travel-related CO2 emissions is reduced by 537 tons. We did a study a year ago in Utah, which has a tax credit that includes personal residences, as did the bill in California. And on our team for the study was Robert Young, a professor at the University of Utah, and he made an analysis of per-person waste generation and the waste generated if one modest-sized house were raised rather than rehabilitated. Now, you all know those Mormons in Utah, they don't drink alcohol, they don't smoke, they don't drink coffee, so they have long lives, but the demolition of one house in Salt Lake City generates more waste than one person would generate if they lived 139 years. Even in Utah, they don't live that long. So I made a similar calculation for California. If one 2,200 square foot house was rehabilitated through the tax credit, that would have had the same impact on waste generation as all of the plastic bags used by 450 people over their entire lifetime. I think it might be a fine idea to get rid of plastic bags, but it is the ignorance of the governor and the myopia of the environmental movement that plastic bags are the priority and historic preservation is not. If a throwaway society is not sustainable, then why isn't keeping our historic built environment the number one priority of environmentalists? And keep in mind, when we throw away a plastic bag, we're throwing away plastic. When we throw away an historic house, we're throwing away its cultural, aesthetic, social, and educational values, as well as its environmental and economic value. And maybe the biggest loss is the memory that's being thrown away. Historic buildings are the physical manifestation of memory, and without memory, nothing has value. And that's the reason why historic preservation needs to get serious. I said earlier how pleased I am to be here to celebrate the accomplishments of the Cincinnati Preservation Association over the last 50 years, but I'm even more honored to be part of the undertaking we are doing with CPA in Walnut Hills. It is preservation getting serious, and I honestly believe it will set the pattern for a redefinition of the role of historic preservation in cities around the country. So let me take a minute and explain how we got here. Paul mentioned that each year I teach a graduate class on the economics of historic preservation at the University of Pennsylvania, and it's both the most fun and the least profitable of anything I do, but it's great, and I learn far more from the students than they learn from me. And 3 or 4 years ago, I had a student, Kara Bertrand, who wrote her master's thesis on the role of historic preservation was playing in cities' right-sizing efforts. I know that here in Cincinnati, you're familiar with the term. It's generally defined as readjusting a city's shrinking city's built environment, buildings and infrastructure, to match its current and projected population and redevelopment trends. The 2013 population of Cincinnati is almost exactly what it was in 1890. Well, Kara's research was to learn what role, if any, historic preservation was playing in these right-sizing efforts. Her discovery was that while planners, preservationists, and even often the person in charge of right-sizing activities believed that preservation should be a central part of the process, it almost never was. In fact, in most cases, preservationists weren't even at the table. As an aside, in Kara's research, Cincinnati was a notable exception to this, where preservationists have been part of the decision-making process almost from the beginning, thanks in large measure to the competence and the capacity of CPA to play a significant role. Anyway, on reading Kara's thesis, my capitalist side kicked in and decided if cities were now making formal right-sizing plans, if historic preservation should be part of that process but rarely is, then there must be an opportunity to figure out a way to assist cities in making decisions when they're faced with far more needs than resources, and too many decisions, particularly regarding demolition, are being made on an ad hoc basis. So I hired Kara, and we set up our Right-Sizing Cities initiative, but then we had to figure out what that meant. And so part of the process, we spent a month 2 years ago visiting 15 or 20 cities whose populations had been declining. In each place, we tried to learn what actions were being taken locally, the opportunity for historic preservation, and then just try to learn who the players were. And Cincinnati was one of the cities that we visited. And we met with Ed Cunningham, who, as you probably all know, heads the Property Maintenance and Code Enforcement Division at City Hall, and with whom Kara had interviewed for her thesis. Now, you may or may not know this, but Ed is really viewed in the right-sizing world as one of the most enlightened in terms of incorporating historic preservation into a comprehensive strategy. But while we were here, we also met with Paul and Margot and Dick and others with CPA. We got a great tour of the city's historic neighborhoods and had a chance to listen and learn and explain what we were trying to put together. Now, I have to make this clear. We had no idea at the time exactly what we were going to do, only that preservation shouldn't be left out of the perspectives in right-sizing efforts. So based on that month-long trip, some research we did for the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and some other research, what we came up with was Relocal. And Relocal is a data-based approach at both the neighborhood and the parcel level. Relocal has around 75 metrics in 8 broad categories: environment, engagement, fiscal, real estate, economic opportunity, stability, community character, and walkability. And of those 75 metrics, no more than a handful are historic preservation based. They are just variables that make for good, sustainable cities and neighborhoods. But we were convinced from the beginning that if we had a rational, objective basis to evaluate neighborhoods, it would be historic neighborhoods that more often than not would come to the top. While Relocal is a data-based process, it's augmented in two ways. First is a field survey conducted looking at every parcel in the neighborhood, and when there is a building on the parcel, it is graded as to its character, quality, and condition, and to its context within the block. Also, because we didn't want to apply these metrics in the abstract, there is also a community survey to determine which of the variables might be of particular importance to a neighborhood, and based on that, change the relative weighting of our variables. And then, as a result of that, kind of create a spectrum of where neighborhoods would fall, from kind of abandoning residential use at one end to repopulate at the other. Now, the original purpose that we saw for Relocal was to give cities, particularly municipal governments, an objective data-based means to allocate among neighborhoods scarce resources, to use the tools that are appropriate to the particular neighborhood, and to make demolition decisions when they're necessary on a strategic rather than an ad hoc basis. And we think those goals are still appropriate. But one of the valuable lessons we've learned in our Walnut Hills project was that we made far too narrow assumptions about the potential approach of use of this approach. So over the 2 years or so that Relocal was in development, we kept in touch with Paul and Margot and our progress, and those discussions continued to move forward until we finally got a call from Paul saying, we're ready to move forward with this, and we think we found a great neighborhood to apply Relocal to, Walnut Hills. And our initial response was this: well, we can certainly adapt our process to a single neighborhood, but it was really created as a comparative tool among neighborhoods. To which Paul responded, well, Walnut Hills is very large and with very different areas within the neighborhood boundaries, so we think it'll work here. So about 4 months ago, our collaboration with CPA and the Walnut Hills Redevelopment Foundation began. And our first trip here to look at the neighborhood, we reached the same conclusion. This was certainly an area appropriate for this approach, with great diversity within the area. And by mutual agreement, this project was put on the fast track so that at least preliminary results could be shared with you today. So I'd like to tell you what we've learned in Walnut Hills, a little about the process here, and then put this method of preservation get serious into a national and international context. So here's Walnut Hills. You all know it. It is north and a bit east of downtown, east of over the Rhine. Here is the neighborhood itself. It's bisected north and south by Gilbert, east and west by McMillan, Taft, and at the north side on MLK. So that's and on the south by the park. That's the neighborhood. And here's its characteristics. Population decline of about 2,000 people over the 12-year period, about 2/3 African American and 1/3 white. 21% of the population under 18 and almost 14% over 65. 54% of households with a household income of less than $25,000, with about 27% over $50,000. 22% people live in single-family homes. 53% live in small apartment complexes. Home ownership rate of about 21%. Now, I'll tell you honestly that with these characteristics, it's very easy for chain store site selection guys and often home builders and developers to just write off the neighborhood because there's no opportunity, and they would be wrong. Well, we had a great opportunity and great hospitality from Kevin Wright at the foundation, and so he helped us kind of disaggregate the neighborhood into 6 kind of sub neighborhood areas: the far north, the northeast, the northwest, central, southwest, and southeast. So that's where we started. So what I want to do with you is really share some kind of factoids and information at 3 levels: from the kind of broad data we looked at, from the field survey we did, and from the community survey we did. So starting with, what did we learn in the big data? And just some kind of general information. Now, this is a political statement, and you're welcome to disagree with it. But I have come to the conclusion that one of the most important things at the neighborhood level is economic integration. That you need a wide range of income levels within a single neighborhood if it's going to be a healthy neighborhood. It may, in fact, be even more important than racial integration to have a healthy neighborhood. So we look as Walnut Hills as a whole, and our kind of measure of economic integration is the distribution of incomes for the neighborhood similar, a mirror of the distribution for the city at large. And Walnut Hills as a whole doesn't do too badly in that regard. Has a few more low-income, a few more low-income households, a few less higher-income households, but as a whole, doesn't stack up too badly. But when you drill down to these neighborhood areas, a decidedly different story. Now, in fact, the only of the 6 sub-areas that is kind of still has strong economic integration is the southeast. The balance of them are overwhelmingly predominated by very low-income households. Here, the median family income, it's about $58,000 in southeast. In every one of the other 5, median household income less than $20,000. Here's the percentage of incomes with households with incomes of less than $25,000, and it ranges between 70% and 80% in 4 of the 6 neighborhoods. It doesn't mean that we got to accommodate people of every income range. What it means is there is no economic integration in the vast majority of Walnut Hills, and that has to change. Here is home ownership rates. Now, because of kind of the peculiarity of the building stock here, in fact, Cincinnati has as a whole a lower rate of home ownership than does the country as a whole. The Walnut Hills has a decidedly lower rate, about half of the rate, than the city as a whole. The only place where it's significant at all is in the southeast and southwest, and it's an issue that I want to come back to shortly. Now, it's not, I don't want to suggest, though, that this is all kind of bad news, because it isn't. We looked at the city, by the way, had just been fabulous in providing us data of the most geeky kind in massive quantities that my poor people have to shuffle through. But here's the building permit data in Walnut Hills for the last 10 years of both new construction and rehabilitation. On average, over a 10-year period, much of which was in the depths of a recession, there's been average 1 building permit per week for rehabilitation in Walnut Hills. Oh, can't quite, okay. My Madonna thing doesn't quite. Paul had asked me to wear a Madonna outfit, and I was going to do that, but excuse me. So, in spite of the fact that it's a neighborhood not of great wealth, it is a neighborhood with low rates of home ownership, and we're in the midst of a real estate recession for much of the time. Every week, there was another building permit coming out for rehabilitation in the neighborhood. So that expression of confidence in the future by the property owners in the area. And here's another issue that's really become a major variable in just good cities, and that's this issue of walkability. Most of you will know this, but there's a computer-based thing called walkscore.com. Go there, type in any address in America, and it will give you a walk score from 1 to 100. And it is becoming widely used by real estate firms and others kind of making decisions. Just 2 days ago, the real estate brokerage Redfin bought walkscore.com because they saw it so important in this. Well, as a city as a whole, Cincinnati doesn't exactly blow away the scores on WalkScore. It's about 50. Every one of the 6 sub-area neighborhoods in Walnut Hills, in fact, has a walk score higher than the city as a whole. So, some challenges and some good news. Then we did a field survey, and Diana Taisu and the Cincinnati Preservation Collaboration and the Walnut Hills Redevelopment Foundation and CPA put out a call for volunteers. And so we had about 20 people over a 3-day period out walking the blocks with a smartphone and a cool, some technological system where the Google Earth map is overlaid with the city's parcel map and locates you on GPS, so you're standing on the sidewalk and there's the property you're looking at. And we had built a short survey. Every parcel in Walnut Hills, every one of them, vacant lot, land, everything, was surveyed over a 3 or 4 day period. And so that data is updated and can be mapped, and I'll show you probably more than you ever want to see that kind of information. Brief survey. It wasn't like a register for a nomination for a National Register district would require, but a kind of basic understanding of the character of the buildings. Is there a building on the site? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, what condition is the building? What's the quality of the building? Is it occupied? What's the condition of the sidewalk? Is there graffiti? Short survey, averaged about 1 minute per property for those volunteers over the time. And so this is, it's buildings. We start with buildings in Walnut Hills. Here's what's interesting, and you might not guess. About 2/3 of all of the buildings in Walnut Hills, more than 2/3, was identified as being in good or very good condition. But when you move to the ratings for vacant buildings, the ones in good condition fall by half. Kind of not surprising. That's the kind of bad news. The good news is that there's only about 1 in 5 that are considered in poor condition. And that means there's kind of hope for a number of those buildings. For a long time, and not here in Cincinnati, but for many places in the right-sizing world, the question has always been, we got a bunch of federal money, what should we tear down first? And we are not at all in the position of saying nothing should be torn down, but the question ought to be turned around. The question ought to be, what should we save? What should we save should be the first question. Well, one of the ways to look at it is which of the vacant buildings are in good condition, and that's what we're looking at here. And then we're, Cincinnati preservation, so we care about, character of the building. So we looked at the building character. And what's interesting to me is, I really am a numbers geek. Here we had volunteers doing it from Margot, who would know everything about every building in all of Cincinnati, let alone Walnut Hills, to, some young people who were kind of just really interested, maybe didn't know a whole lot. They got 20 minutes worth of training of kind of how to score things from Kara, and off they went. Here's this distribution that's almost like some math professor would say, here's what a distribution should look like. That if 3 or 4% identified as landmarks, and then about a quarter each in low quality and high quality, and the half of them in the medium quality. So the kind of reliability of this wide range of volunteers is kind of reinforced in the data that they come up with. Here's what interesting one for the preservation world is there are in Walnut Hills 2 National Register districts and 1 local historic district. And you should know, most of you do, the National Register districts are an access to federal tax credits but provide no protection for the properties. Local districts, on the other hand, are the only means of protecting, but at least having some historic district is a something. 70% of the buildings that were deemed either of landmark or high character buildings, in fact, are in neither, which means there's a whole bunch of really arguably historic buildings that are under no kind of either identification or protection in the area. We have a great, and this is what, we started looking at these maps, and this is where I saw how much we suffer from the paucity of imagination when we thought about who would use this process. When we started looking at this, you have a great organization, Keep Cincinnati Beautiful. They do some wonderful stuff, and as part of the Neighborhood Enhancement Program, they've done in the last 30 or 40 days a lot of work in Walnut Hills, but one of their focuses is graffiti. Well, so here are the buildings, and frankly not very many, but here are the buildings in Walnut Hill where our surveyors saw graffiti on the buildings. Now, here's the sidewalks that are in poor condition. Now, this is not a slap at the city at all, because something like 70% of the sidewalks, to everybody's surprise, were really in good condition. But if I'm the public works director and say, I got a crew today, where should I send them? Well, there's where in Walnut Hills the sidewalks are deemed in poor condition. So here's the kind of next piece that was very interesting to us. As part of this collaboration, Paul and CPA had already established a relationship with the Center for Aging and Community at the University of Indiana. And Phil Stamford, who runs that operation, and Ed Sullivan were both here. They said, we're really interested in this process, and Phil in particular thinks there's this correlation between historic neighborhoods and where aging in place could take place. So we looked at that. So we looked at these issues, and so there are the places that are appropriate for senior housing, either new infill construction or recommitted. Why? Because the these locations in Walnut Hills reflect both the locational preferences of seniors in the neighborhood. I want to be within a quarter of a mile of the grocery store, of the pharmacy, of public transportation, and we added to that, we're going to put seniors where the sidewalks are good. So if you're the developer of senior housing, those are the places that it ought to go. A couple other things about this that sometimes we miss. Here's a city of population of 260 or 270,000 people. 557,000 people in this city live by themselves. A bunch of those, but not all of them, are older. This living alone, process is both younger people getting started and older who have, lost a spouse. Huge cohort, 57,000 people in the city. Well, much of the home building industry is building, 3,500 square foot houses for Leave It to Beaver, when that's not the household anymore. So here's two things about that. Great opportunity. Second, it is a great opportunity for small scale housing. We're often tearing down, some stupid 800 square foot shotgun house saying, oh, that's out of the market. Nobody wants that. We got to get rid of that and build something the market will want. This market is looking for exactly that, either in small scale existing housing or new construction at both ends of the generational spectrum. One of the, and I'm going to come to the survey stuff in a moment, but there's a concept many of you are familiar with called third places. Been around now for 15 or 20 years, but that home is our first place, work is our second, but human beings need a third place to congregate and be with other people. So in our community survey, we asked how important are third places, and then are there any in the neighborhood? Where do you go? And here's where the people identified, is here are our third place gathering places in Walnut Hills. So then comes the community survey. Now we're idiots. All I can tell you is we're big idiots. Is our purpose of the community survey was not to kind of get, predict who's going to win the next election. It really was simply so we could change our weighting on the various metrics. So if neighborhood 1 said, a school in the neighborhood is really important, we'd add to that scoring. Here's our confession. We didn't make any changes based on the community survey. We got a good response and lots of help from the Walnut Hills Development Foundation, CPA, and the universities to getting out. The survey is done electronically. We didn't make no adjustments. Why? Because in spite of this extraordinary dissimilarity demographically in Walnut Hills, the responses were virtually identical across the board. And I want to share some of those with you. Many of the questions were rated from 5, very important to me, 1, not important. So that's the kind of numbers you see. One of the questions is, how is it important to you to be close to shops and neighborhoods? There's the answer across. No statistical difference among them in the 5 sub-areas. Here is streets with character. How important is that? And so all of them have that significant importance. And here's the next one. It's something that Paul mentioned. Here is important to have unique or interesting buildings. Very important. In every neighborhood, however, slightly less important than the character of the street. And that is this evolution of historic preservation. It's not just about, we need to save the big landmarks, but it's no longer just that. When we move to the neighborhood, it's the street character. In fact, it becomes even more important. High rate of home ownership, deemed very important even in those neighborhoods where there's virtually no home ownership, which suggests an opportunity for those creating, packages to encourage home ownership. Racially and economically diverse population, as important. People, that's not used to some people at some time that was a disadvantage. It's an asset, something we're looking for, even in the neighborhoods that are neither racially nor economically diverse. The neighbors in those neighborhoods said that's an important thing about a neighborhood. Stunningly important finding, I think. Cool places to hang out. It didn't matter by age, by location, and that's why when you looked at the map of the third places, they were scattered in almost all 6 of the areas because everybody wants their own cool place to hang out. Civic engagement. For those of you saying, hey, we want to get involved in Walnut Hills, so let's go and do something, you better damn well be talking to people, because across the board, this issue about the public being involved on the future of their neighborhood, clearly very important. There was Phil that I mentioned earlier, and others have been positing for some time that there is a great correlation of interests between baby boomers, who are all in the retirement age category now, And millennials, the people from, say, 20 to 34 who are kind of starting the work for, maybe there's been some substantive research. If there has, I haven't stumbled over it, but that's exactly what we found in Walnut Hills. I sorted out those survey responses by age. 8 of the 10 top priorities, out of probably 40, 8 of the 10 were the same for people 20 to 34 as they were from 65 and over. That's a really stunning finding to me. And you can see what they are. So what's in the report? The report will be delivered, in the next 45 days or so. And here's some of the components. Here's where those neighborhoods, now there may be some minor adjustment before we're done, but here's where those neighborhoods end up. None of them in the lower 2 categories, where we either say, transition from residential use or abandoned residential use, and the difference between those two is really the rate that you ought to do it. Both of these are either in the stabilize or all 6 of them, either in the stabilize or repopulate. Again, I'm not making up stuff. We looked at 875 data points, and this is how that led us to those conclusions. Also on the parcel survey, there's around 200 or so vacant properties, either buildings or lots in Walnut Hills. For every one of those, they will be broken down into 4 what we're calling opportunity categories. That on the building side, that some will be in the rehabilitate side, some will be in the stabilize side, that's kind of warehouse and wait, see what happens. Some as an alternative, that's probably not viable as a residential use, so should it be evolved to a different kind of use, or in fact moved, something that historically has not been a preservation preference tool, but here it very much might be, or is this a place where you ought to raise and recycle? There will be some demolition, and there needs to be, and where those falls, every property will fall in that category of buildings. Every vacant lot will fall into one of these categories. Here's a good lot for infill. Here is a good lot for active use. That might be some side lot for an existing homeowner. Some for utilitarian use. That is there a place for alternative energy production or a community garden or something. And then on the passive use, kind of maybe this is just kind of what we let go back to the weeds. Every property, vacant land, will sit there. And in those categories, there will be a range of things. So we have these 4 broad categories, then for each one of them, 4 or 5 strategies that might be appropriate for a property in that situation, and 4 or 5 tools to implement that strategy. It would be presumptuous for us to say, take that building and convert it into a corner bakery. Absolutely not at that level. It's in the kind of broad category, so local people with a nuanced understanding say, based on that, here's what we might do. And what we really envision when this is done is this whole range of things, that decisions not just by, this isn't a tool, even though CPA footed the bill for this isn't a tool for CPA. This is really CPA giving to the city of Cincinnati and the potential stakeholders in Walnut Hill a set of tools and analyses that they can use in a whole wide range of things. Our whole approach is based on a kind of short set of principles. One is that preservation is a means, not an end. It's a tool for something else, not just to save old stuff. Second is that there is a need to set priorities. And that is not something that the preservation world has been particularly good at in the past. They need to in these kind of situations. Third, there's not just one set of standards. We have to adjust our standards based on the nature and the condition of the neighborhood, the building, and the context. It needs to be data-driven. We can no longer just say, I'm going to weep because the building is gone. We have to make a quantitative case why that should be the case. Tools need to be assembled to address this issue and build partnerships. And that's what CPA did such a great job in our preparation, is all the variety of stakeholders in Cincinnati that we got in to talk to learn from, to beg information and data from. So that's kind of what's what in Walnut Hills, and you'll see that in 45 days or so, the whole thing. But I want to kind of wrap up by moving beyond Cincinnati and giving you some kind of things that are happening nationally. A bunch of cities like Cincinnati have been declining in population for 50 years. Philadelphia is one of them. And in the 2010 census, they had an uptick of 8,900 people, and it was like the second coming or something. It was the big headlines, we've turned the corner, we're getting better. We gained, 8,900 people, pretty insignificant in the population of Philadelphia, but it was this big legitimate cause for celebration, except they were wrong. They didn't gain 8,900 people. The historic districts in Philadelphia gained 12,000 people. The rest of the city still lost 3,000. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. I live in Washington, D.C., same situation, finally turned the corner between 2000 and 2010. What happened? Well, 45% of the population in Washington, D.C. lives in historic districts, but that was where 63% of the population growth took place. Boston turned the corner a little earlier, started to turn the population corner a decade earlier. 22% of the population of Boston lives in historic districts, but that's where 36% of people came to. The message is this: when people start returning, the historic districts are the first place they return to. So if we want people coming back, we sure as hell better not be tearing down places where they'll come back to. Then we just finished a study in Raleigh, and this is a kind of broader kind of thing, so I want you to share this information in a different kind of city, one that's rapidly growing and so forth. They have a bunch of National Register districts and what they call overlay districts, which are essentially local historic districts. So we looked at those districts and how they differed from the rest of the city. So here was the property value change in the city of Raleigh from 2000 to 2008, the city as a whole. There's the property value change in local historic districts, what the value change in National Register districts. A consistent pattern in this kind of analysis around the country. But there's a bunch of foreclosure time. There's, terrible foreclosure process in that. So we looked at all of the foreclosures in Raleigh from the kind of height of the real estate recession until currently. Almost 1 in 10, 100 out of every 1,000 properties, single-family houses in Raleigh went under foreclosure in that time period. There's what happened in the historic National Register districts and the local districts. Not because they're all rich, they aren't. They're spread all over the income status. Consistent pattern finding there. Raleigh's a sprawling city. They're kind of not confined like you are by the geography. You can see how their density of people per square mile has changed over the last 110 years. And there's what the city of Raleigh is today. The city as a whole, about 2,500 people living per mile. Here is the population, the density in the local historic districts and the National Register districts. Twice the density of the city as a whole. And there's all kinds of planning reasons and fiscal reasons to be good about density. But the issue is this: it's not just density, it's density at a human scale, density at a level that people still want to live. And then I asked my colleague Bree to find a relatively new residential subdivision. In Raleigh, the only criteria is that it be roughly the size of one of the local historic districts. So she found these, Oakwood in Raleigh and Reedham Oaks Wyndham. So they're both 114 acres. Population about 3 times as much in Oakwood, 4 times as many housing units. Average year of construction in the historic district, 1925. In the new one, 1992. I happen to be on the political spectrum that believes in frugal use of taxpayers' dollars. And today, liberal Democrats, conservative Republicans, everybody says they're for that. So we just kind of made the measure on fiscal impacts to the city of these two choices. Same size, same amount of land within the city of Raleigh. What are the differences? So the size of the house, about 2,500 in the historic district, about 3,500 in Reedham. Average value about $315,000 in the historic district, $525 in the new one. Taxes per unit about $2,800, $2,900 in the historic district, about $4,800 in the new subdivision. Population per acre 14.5 versus 4. Square feet of road per unit, 1,000 in the historic district, 2,200 in the new subdivision. Taxes per acre, 22,000 in the historic district, 5,300 in the new subdivision. And much of public costs are based on the amount of square footage, square acres you got to cover. We calculated what the water and sewer replacement cost would be. By the way, something we're also doing in Walnut Hills. $8,900 in Oakwood, $25,000 in the low-density subdivision. Annual property taxes generated from the neighborhood, $2.3 million in the historic district, $600,000. Where's the fiscal responsibility? Now, I don't mean we shouldn't have low-density subdivisions, but this nonsense that these stupid old neighborhoods, they're not doing us any good, that's simply not the case. That simply fiscally is not the case. In downtown Raleigh, a big downtown organization saying we're growing. Where did the new businesses go to? There's lots of new construction in downtown Raleigh. That's not what they went to. Is that half of them went to historic buildings, and another quarter of them went to older buildings that just hadn't been designated historic yet. Everybody's pushing for knowledge workers. The historic districts only had about 3.5% of the jobs in Raleigh, but 6% of the professional jobs, 8% of the educational services, those kind of knowledge worker jobs, they're disproportionately located in historic districts. We looked at the state of North Carolina is trying to really push, well, you need this creative class workers, those arts workers. So where are they? Well, it's a relatively small number. State as a whole has about 1%. Raleigh has a little over 2%. Where are they going? Where are those people who work in those creative fields going? They're living disproportionately in historic neighborhoods. And then some lessons from kind of beyond the globe. My new best friend is a guy by the name of John O'Brien, who for years was in charge of attracting direct foreign investment to Ireland. And in spite of their kind of being one of the real sufferers in the last recession, Dublin in particular for 15 years has been a real magnet for smart young people. And here's what John O'Brien says. He said, I don't care about stupid old buildings. He said, these companies, and there's his map of all the big high-tech companies located in Dublin. He said, I got to be honest, the companies are coming here because we got a bunch of really smart, well-educated young people. He said, but my question then was, why do the young people come here? And he said, the answer is the quality of life. And he said, and I learned that historic quality of Dublin was one of the reasons, was a major quality of life variable. That's John's story. He doesn't come from the preservation world, comes from the economic development. So, 6 months after I met him and saw his map, I happened to be in doing some work for the Dutch Culture Ministry in Rotterdam, and met a guy at Erasmus University who's a really geeky guy, and his university has purchased for him this gargantuan database of direct foreign investment. So thousands of transactions. A company in Cincinnati that opens a plant in Nairobi, tens of thousands of transactions. So here was my thesis. If, for the first time in history, jobs are following people instead of people following jobs, that people go where they want to go, jobs follow, that people make those choices, particularly there's knowledge workers, based on the quality of place, quality of that place, and again, Richard Florida and others have written about that. But the third part is, and if historic preservation, historic built environment is a big part of the quality of life equation, we ought to see a different pattern of direct foreign investment in those places with a concentration of historic resources. So we set up this test. We looked in Europe because of the kind of data availability of places that were both identified as World Heritage Cities, but also belonged to the Organization of World Heritage Cities, meaning they kind of understood the importance. And then this Ron Wall at Erasmus University says, okay, we're going to sort this out so we make sure that nothing else is attributable to this. So he did things like region, population, density, pollution, all of the things to sort out so that there's no difference. And what's the difference in the patterns of direct foreign investment? Over the 10-year period, typically those historic cities belonging to the World Heritage Organization saw 41 more instances of direct foreign investment than the rest of them did. And a whole bunch of those cities in the rest of the list, certainly we'd walk and say, wow, this is a great historic city, didn't meet our test. There is the pattern somebody ought to be paying attention to. And finally, preservationists have worked, CPA has worked its whole existence to kind of get preservation a place in the chain of command in decision-making at City Hall. We got transportation, education, economic development. We need a slot for historic preservation. Thank you all for doing that. I think it's the place we needed to start. I don't think it's the place we need to be. I think instead of saying, here's historic preservation, what are we supposed to be doing? We need to change the equation. We need to start asking the question, what's the role of historic preservation in housing, in transportation, in education, in economic development? So it's not preservation by itself, but preservation's contribution to the rest of these priorities. So optimism for Walnut Hills. I'm telling you, this is a place that's going to be meeting tomorrow's market demands. The Urban Land Institute, kind of best real estate think tank in the country, recently did a survey about what the preferences are of people who are going to be buying a house in the last 5 years. What are the big answers? Shop close to home, close to shops and restaurants, shorter commute, but smaller home, available to public transportation, mix of homes, mix of incomes. Those are what define Walnut Hills. So Relocal and us, we're not providing answers for anything. What we're hoping to do is provide the kind of information analysis so that local people can make better decisions. So good luck, and thank you all very much.
We're going to invite Patrick Snaden up to moderate a few questions. If you need to go, but I hope you can stay for a little.